America is no stranger to tales and urban legends. It's a large continent that supports a diverse array of ecosystems, cultures, and civilizations. Everywhere you go, you are liable to find stories about colorful characters, strange areas, and spooky creatures. These stories are passed down through relatives, friends, internet forums, or sometimes through a book. When we hear these stories growing up, our imaginations run wild, and the world around us seems so much more inspiring, terrifying, and adventurous. To kids, these stories have such a visceral impact on our view of the world that we hardly ponder where these rumors and legends originated from. When we grow up, we often leave these tales behind. We stop believing or even really caring about the stories, and chalk up the fact that we ever found them interesting in the first place to childhood naivete. There is one story for me which had found itself in this position. A story that I found so uniquely creepy growing up, I decided to look a little bit further into its origins, out of curiosity. Let me tell you, it's true that truth is stranger than fiction, and at least in this story, there is still some truth, even in the fiction. This is the story of the Donkey Lady. Let me give y'all a quick rundown on the urban legend in case you're unfamiliar, as it is a fairly simple story. In Live Oak, Texas, in a quiet forested area, sits an unbecoming bridge across Elm Creek. This bridge is known to locals as the Donkey Lady Bridge. According to the legend, sometime in the 1950s, a local woman lived with her husband and their children in a quiet homestead near Elm Creek. Out of the blue, the woman's husband went insane, attempting to murder her and her children and burn the cabin down. While somehow managing to avoid being killed by the husband, she could not save the house or the children from the flames. While attempting to rescue her kids from the burning cabin, she herself was badly burned, her toes and fingers fusing together till they resembled hooves, and her face and neck being seared and elongated until they resembled the face of a donkey. Forever in grief over the loss of her children and the horrible transformation her body endured, she, or perhaps her ghost, continues to haunt and stalk the area around Elm Creek, particularly the bridge. It is said that if you go to this bridge and call out to the Donkey Lady, or drive up and honk your horn, she will appear out of the darkness, running and shrieking at you. If you are lucky enough, or perhaps just smart enough to have come in your car, she will jump onto it and scream into your windows until you make a hasty exit. Many people claim to have had their cars dented and scratched during just such encounters. There are several variations of the story, but none break too far off from the basic outline I just gave above. This is a classic example of a good, spooky urban legend. A tragic story resulting in a twisted monster that inhabits a specific border between society and the wilderness. There are many stories like it. Losing a child and the grief that it causes has certainly been impactful enough on the human condition throughout history to warrant an abundance of stories that deal with this theme. From a distance, this story may appear to just be another example of a classic paranormal trope. The spirit of a mother who is unable to deal with the grief of losing her child continues to walk to Earth to remind us of her pain. However, upon looking at the origins of this story, we find a very different kind of tragedy unfold. Believe it or not, there actually was a Donkey Lady in Live Oak, Texas in the mid to late 20th century. But this story is far different from the urban legend I just told you, although it is no less tragic. She was a woman named Doc Anderson. All the information I was able to find about her comes from the town of Live Oak's official website. On their website, they have a history section that delves into the history of their town, including the story of the Donkey Lady and Doc Anderson. Many people which lived in Live Oak at the time wrote into the website to explain what they remember about Mrs. Anderson. Some accounts conflict over minor details, but for the most part, the real story of the Donkey Lady goes as follows. During the 1940s and 50s, a woman named Doc Anderson ran a donkey show called Doc's Little Dude Ranch on Fredericksburg Road in Live Oak, Texas. She would take out children for donkey rides or hay rides throughout the countryside, and would teach people how to ride horses and donkeys properly. She did this for some time, and was generally liked by her customers and dearly cared for her animals. At some point in the 1950s, her business was evicted from its location on Fredericksburg Road. At this time, Doc lived with a man named Oscar. There's some discrepancy in the reports on the Live Oak website on if Oscar was Doc's brother or husband, but most accounts say he was her husband, so I think that is the most likely scenario. Doc and Oscar lived in a shack off of O'Connor Road and were very poor, often going hungry so that they could feed their animals, but were reportedly very friendly and welcoming to those that knew them. Unfortunately, they were frequently the victims of pranks, as it became commonplace for teenagers to sneak out to the shack at night and untie their donkeys and horses, letting them loose into the woods. It was also around this time that Doc started being known as the Donkey Lady, and children were frequently dared to ride their bikes past the, quote, crazy Donkey Lady's house. Doc had lost her left arm to either cancer or diabetes, and this only served to further fuel the fear local children felt for her and her growing legend. Eventually, the pranks reached their darkest point when a hooligan shot Doc's prized horse Mohawk through the neck with a bow and arrow. Mohawk didn't survive this injury, and this left Doc extremely upset. Tragedy didn't stop befalling Doc Anderson after this event either. Eventually, Oscar died, and she was evicted again, this time from the shack she lived in, which was located on private property. She and her animals moved deeper into the woods, in a place called the Robards. This area was apparently home to many other vagrants, and was supposedly very dangerous. But Doc seemed unwilling to give up her animals and let herself be committed somewhere, so to her this was the only option. Wherever she was staying inside of the Robards apparently did not have water, so Doc would lead her donkeys into town so that they could drink. The sight of a homeless, disheveled, and armless woman emerging from the woods with 5 to 6 donkeys certainly stirred up local stories and rumors about her. She lived like this in the Robards for decades, until eventually, sometime in the early 90s, it is believed she was committed to a nursing home and died shortly after. Although this era marked the end of Doc Anderson, it did not mark the end of the legends surrounding her. In fact, without the actual Donkey Lady strolling into town every so often to get water, the stories about her were free to grow more and more fantastical, eventually becoming the urban legend that we know today. When I first decided to make this video, I was only planning on going over the urban legend of the Donkey Lady and the variations in its story. It is a quite popular urban legend here in Texas, and there's no shortage of articles and books detailing the tale of a burned woman stalking the area of Elm Creek. It was only by accident that I came across Live Oak's official website and the information that they had about Doc Anderson, which, as far as I can tell, is the only place on the internet with any info on her. Why is the story of a fictional monster birthed from a tragedy so much more appealing to us than the story of a real-life woman which inspired it? It is a common thing in the monster story genre for a tale to get watered down more and more until the monster is a mere caricature of its original self. Frankenstein is a great example of that, and like Frankenstein, the original story of the Donkey Lady is not the tale of a monster being created overnight, but the tragedy of being abandoned by society. Maybe that's what makes us the most uncomfortable about stories like this, and what drives us to simplify them into palatable, albeit more horrifying legends. In the original urban legend, the cause of the suffering is just the husband going randomly mad one day, something that is unexplained and completely out of left field. While horrible and tragic things certainly do come out of nowhere in real life, the randomness of it doesn't make us feel culpable. It's just one of those things that can happen. The story of someone being ostracized, however, does make us feel guilty, as we all can recall times we were outcasts and times when we outcasted others, particularly in our childhood and teenage years. It's no coincidence, then, that the bulk of the cruelty imposed on Doc Anderson over the years came from childlike pranks and rumors. The worst tragedies, though, did not come from the youth. Doc Anderson's life is a grim reminder of our society's failings to take care of the most eccentric and caring among us. Sometimes the strangest people are what make a community interesting, but due to their eccentricities, we find it difficult or even impossible to fit them into our society. They slip through the cracks. The bulk of Doc and Oscar's financial troubles reportedly came from medical expenses. After spending all their money just in an attempt to keep themselves and their animals alive, they faced eviction after eviction, and Doc was essentially forced to choose between giving up her animals and allowing herself to be committed, or continuing to live in the fringe of society but be allowed her freedom. This highlights some of the failed assumptions we make about our system. Often, we do not go out of our way to take care of or help people like this, and we pass that responsibility onto the state. But often, the state is so rigid and regulated that the solutions it offers are pre-scripted and frankly useless when attempting to use them on real people. I'm reminded of the case of Julie Hall, a farmer in Michigan who would take in wounded or disabled animals and care for them on her farm. This included many deer, a one-legged crow, and a blind raccoon. In the state of Michigan, it is required that someone has a permit in order to take care of wild animals. And although she was on the waiting list for this permit, Julie had not received it yet. So one day, the Department of Natural Resources showed up to her farm, fined Julie Hall, and put all of her animals down. This permit was intended to make the lives of animals safer and to ensure that they were not being taken advantage of or mistreated. This is a noble aim, but like most regulations, the rigidity with which they are enforced can often produce the opposite of the intended effect. Instead of being used to protect animals, this regulation caused the death of several of the creatures it was designed to protect and punished the only person that went out of their way to care for them. Indeed, caring for animals is one of the more noble things you can do, as you are sacrificing your own time and resources to provide for something which has no means of ever paying you back. Doc Anderson cared for her animals, and by all accounts was a kind-hearted and welcoming woman. Back in her day, she was known not only as the Donkey Lady, but also the Skunk Lady. This was because she had a knack for coaxing out skunks that were hiding under people's porches without the skunks spraying the house and the property. She was often asked for help in situations like this. Not only was her care for animals well known around the town, but she was even able to put it to good use for the community. And yet, instead of having a legacy as an eccentric animal lover, the story of her life got turned over time into the tale of a monster. It just goes to show that there may be more to the childhood stories and their origins than meet the eye. Alright y'all, if you made it to the end of the video, thanks for watching. I have another longer video being worked on right now, but that's going to take a lot of time to finish up, so I just wanted to put this one out first. Let me know if y'all have any ideas for future videos, and thanks for watching. Bye-bye.